How about the pizza? Good?
Yay.
Excellent, good. Our second speaker tonight, Mark Edwards. I know Mark for 4 years, 5 years? 4, yeah. We worked together. One day we decided to start writing about Tableau stuff, and we created our blog pointsofviews.com. We don't write that much lately, but Mark is going to talk about why it's important to get certified. Mark?
Thanks very much. Thank you very much. Hi everyone, and please do give me cues if you can't quite hear me. I'll do my best. And there are going to be quite a lot of similarities between my content in terms of the format of some of it, not the quality of the visualizations, with Sam's. That is entirely coincidence, we didn't plan it. I'm also wary that very few people actually say certificate, but this is deliberate ploy on my part in order to find a rhyme in my title. Why it's great to certificate music as a noun, not a verb. But before I start, actually, I just point out all the slides I've got here I've put online. At the end of the presentation there'll be a link that you can follow, so don't feel like you need to take a photo of anything, not that there'll be anything to take a photo of, but don't feel like you need to scribble anything down. There's a link at the end, all the references, all the resources that I'll talk about, you can find just following that link. And it'll be exactly the same deck, you can pass it off as your own if you like later on. Apart from this bit, you don't want to do that bit. So this is about it. This is the first coincidence between mine and Sam's slides. Second slide, there's a bit about me. So as Pablo mentioned, around 3 years ago I was introduced to the world of Tableau, and he and I were working together at the time, and he dragged me along to this thing called the launch event for Tableau 10, which was in June 2016. So by my reckoning that means that was around 11 releases of Tableau ago, so if I'm carbon dating myself in Tableau years or Tableau releases, that means I'm 11 releases old. Sam, what do you reckon you are now? 3? So yeah. And I work for a company called CACI, and our function is around retail finance benchmarking, and I work in this beautiful sun-soaked office in West Kensington, West London. Our clients, well, my department's clients, are banks, building societies, and we help them to access and analyse data about banking, savings, mortgages, that sort of thing, via Tableau server implementation, access via reporting. I joined there around 2 years ago and was lucky enough to inherit an amazing Tableau deployment left behind by David Perez, who checked most of you in on the way today. Like perfect opportunity to come in and sort of grab a Tableau server deployment and hit the ground running. So my title is Head of Data Visualization. What that means, well, some of the key components of my role on the right hand side here. Unlike Sam, I only spend around half my day actively using a Tableau product, whether it be server, desktop or prep. One of the reasons I wanted to give this presentation today is to fill a gap, and I'm going to make no apologies for the fact that this is targeted not at those seasoned Tableau users or people who are deeply entrenched in the community. I'm targeting this at myself 2.5 years ago. Those of you who are trying to get into Tableau, trying to work out what your next steps are, hopefully using or finding different ways of getting into that, people use the phrase community. There are many Tableau communities, and this is one of them. And yeah, many of you will be aware of certification, but I doubt many of you will have seen a presentation about it. So I wanted to give one and fill that gap in. Now, I'm not also going to claim that certification is for everyone, but I do believe that it can empower a lot of people. I want to spread a message that there are opportunities that certification can bring, and it can open up avenues for you. I'm also going to explain the differences between the various levels of certification and share some tips along the way. Now, I personally have had a checkered history with exams. Sam talked about his A-level earlier. I succeeded more in later life, but to begin with, wasn't so great. I wanted to also use this as an opportunity to convince those of you who either haven't really gone with the exams in the past or feel like midway through your career isn't the time to start thinking about doing exams again, that it's the opportunity to reach slightly outside of your comfort zone once again. So this slide gives a window into that checkered history. These are my genuine GCSE certificates, which I went and fetched out from the loft. Another reference back to Sam's presentation earlier. Now, if you've looked at almost any entry-level job description in the UK in the last 20 years, you'll know that having at least 5 A to C's at GCSE is considered a minimum requirement for even getting an interview. So these are my certificates. I did 9 GCSEs, and those of you with good eyesight will see that I only got 4 A to C's. However, I do fortunately have other credentials that qualify me to give this talk tonight. So 3 months ago I got this, which is a certificate for having passed the Desktop Certified Professional Exam. Woo! Woo! Thank you very much. And in 3 seconds you can applaud again for Laura, who passed hers this week. And on the Tableau website, tableau.com/certification, if you scroll down right to the bottom, you'll see a brief interview with me talking about becoming certified. So on this page, so it's tableau.com/certification. There's detailed information about each of the exams, certification directory where they list out all the people who've passed, and then there's my mugshot at the end there, just to put you on. And if I can't seize this moment to extol the virtues of Tableau certification, then perhaps I never will. So after getting the Tableau bug in the second half of 2016, about 3 years ago, I decided I wanted to see if I could turn this Tableau thing into a career option. And as Pablo mentioned earlier, he approached me in December 2016, said, do we want to see if we can write a blog about this? I said, I don't know. And it was after having read this blog post by Neil Richards. If you don't know, Neil Richards is one of the best written blogs related to Tableau at questionsindataviz.com. And here he wrote about how much had changed for him in a single year around his awareness, his integration into different Tableau activities, projects, trying to forge himself a new role, and getting to a conference. And around the same time as Pablo and I were having this conversation about writing a blog together, and having been inspired by Neil's path, I set about creating my own. And that's what you can see on the right-hand side here. This is a highly embarrassing list of things that at the time I felt would set me up well. So, as you'll see, number 2 there, oops, I knew that was going to happen. There we go. It's that one, there. Number 2, right, get certified, find past papers, identify gaps. Now, for those of you who do know Tableau certification, the concept of past papers is not one that really exists. But there are plenty of gaps that we can fill. This one around getting certified was actually the last of the 7 that I managed to tick off between January 2017 and October. I took the exam at TC. I definitely won't bore you with the details of all of these. At the time I wrote a blog post about it, and again, the link will be at the end. So enough about me, let's move on to talk about certifications. And they are split currently between desktop and server. And as yet, there aren't any certifications for Tableau Prep. I'm sure at some point this might happen once the product matures sufficiently. So there are currently 5 different certifications you can get in Tableau that are authorized by Tableau. Official certifications, 3 for desktop, you see across the top here, and 2 for server. And this is relatively recent branding. I don't like to admit how long it took me to pick up on the significance of the bar charts and the logos. So there used to be 2 for each. So there used to be 2 for server, 2 for desktop. The first one used to be called Qualified Associate. You might have heard that term, Qualified Associate. It's now been rebranded to Certified Associate. And it used to be the case that you would take an exam at version level. So you could become certified in Tableau version 8, and version 9, and version 10. And if you wanted to bridge the gap, you'd need to take a Delta exam. That doesn't exist anymore. You get certified for a period of time. So I'm going to focus on desktop for a couple of reasons. First, it's the one that will apply to most of you. Most of you will be active desktop users rather than server admins. It's also the one I can relate to most since I haven't yet taken the server exams. However, I know there are a couple of people here who have. So Chris on the front row, Mark was here somewhere. There's Mark. marks at the back, David Perez. I'm sure there are a few other people who've taken it. By all means, find them, talk to them. I know they're all very enthusiastic about server certification. I'm going to talk primarily about specialist and associate because those are the most tangible ones for relatively new users. And with both of those, you have a series of multiple choice questions, some of which will be theory, testing your knowledge of the tool. And specialist is a 1 hour exam. You get 30 multiple choice questions, and the cost to take it is around $100, roughly £80, and that's valid forever. If you've taken specialist, or once you've taken it, you can claim that title forever. You are a Tableau desktop specialist forever. For the associate, this is kind of like the sort of the daddy version of specialist. It's 2 hours long. There are 36 multiple choice questions. It costs a little more, but it's only valid for 2 years. As the product evolves, new things will come along that you want to be tested on. So if you hold a certified associate title, that's valid for 2 years, and then you'll need to renew it if you want to keep promoting yourself as such. I'm going to share with you some examples of some of the questions lifted from the prep guides for the exams for both specialist and associate. They're not overly strenuous, you might be able to tell. They might be as basic as this, related to how Tableau operates. Sure, Pablo, you can tell me the answer to this one?
No.
It's true. Tableau can create worksheet-specific filters. There are multiple choice questions like this around theory. So, what does the box in a box plot represent? So this is not strictly Tableau specific. This is about data visualization type. So Simon's going to tell us the answer to this one, which is it is B. Yeah. You shouldn't doubt yourself. Simon is a desktop professional. You should know this. Also multiple response. So you might be asked to identify which of these apply. So there are any interactive elements you can add to a dashboard for users, which includes Danny. Sorry.
Come on, Daniel.
It's A and C. URL actions and filter actions. These are the sorts of things you'd be asked if you're doing the either the specialist or the associate level. And then you get questions like this, many more of which you get in the associate level, which are hands-on. So you get given a data set and given very clear instructions as to how to go and find the answer. So in this case, find the top 10 product names in sales within each region, which region is ranked number 2 in both the central and west regions. And when you're doing this sort of thing, it's very useful to just take this question literally step by step. They're really very clearly written in order to guide you towards the answer. Steve, I'm going to be really mean. What's the answer to this one?
Well, it must be C.
It is C, yes! T-shirt and Steve, surely. Yeah, you would have a data set from which to work, obviously. Okay, so that's specialist and associate, relatively high level. What about professional? So the professional exam is 3 hours long and entirely hands-on. So with the first 2, you're given a series of questions to work through. You can come back to them as you like. You can bookmark ones you're not sure about. And as you get to the end, you've got a bit of free time, you come back and check them all. The professional exam is 3 hours long. It's entirely hands-on. And also you must already hold the title of associate at that time in order to take it. As well as testing that you know your way around Tableau, it's also a test of data viz best practice. Do you make appropriate chart choices? You're tasked with creating worksheets, revisualizing something that's been shown to you, creating dashboards, storyboards is something that I know from blog that Simon wrote, in my experience, had very little practice of doing and definitely had to brush up on in advance. There might even be a little bit of data preparation in there as well. And it's all done in a single workbook, and then you submit that at the end of your session, and it's reviewed by a panel. And they they decide whether or not you've passed or failed. There are no strictly right or wrong answers. It's subjective by this panel. And after you've completed that exam, then you find out your result a month later. You have to during for an absolute agonising period of around 3 to 5 weeks. But the feeling, Laura, is what at the end? Relief. So this exam is. When I click through that, I've already seen this. So it's hands-on. So it costs around $600, about just short of £500. Not insignificant. But it is valid for 3 years once you've got it. Now, I'm not really sure if I know that many people who've got to the end of their 3 years and then decided what to do then, whether or not they then feel sufficiently motivated to take it again. What I can say for that exam is it will make you feel like you've been completely sort of comprehensive in your in your knowledge of the subject matter. You come out feeling like an expert. Now you can take these exams, all 3 of them, in person at a conference, either in Europe or in the US, and the environment is kind of like a room like this. It's slightly darker than this example. It's very quiet. Everyone gets sort of herded in to go and sit down and take their exam, and then when you finish, you walk out and take the things. And if you take it at a conference, you also get a discount of around 20% of the price. And this is the kind of environment I took my associate level exam. The alternative, if you can't get to conference, is to take them at home in an environment that looks a bit like this one at the end. And it's conducted online, and you have what they call a proctor, an online invigilator, helping you to get set up at least. So it's all done via webcam, and whilst you're working away doing your exam, somebody is on the other end of the line listening to you, making sure you're not talking to anyone, watching you, making sure you're not picking up pieces of paper. You notice the clear desk, it has to be entirely clear. You get your laptop up and you show them your room to demonstrate that you've not cheated in any way. And it's done through remote desktop. So they connect you to a remote machine, and that's all set up for you. So you only have to have a Chrome session on your browser. That's the only tool you need in order to take the exam, plus the knowledge that you've been building up through preparing in advance. So I took both the specialist exam and the professional this way. I know some people have had some technical issues with them. My personal experience was relatively seamless, around 15 minutes to get set up, then you're away. My only big tip for anyone who's looking or expecting to take an exam anytime soon via the online proctoring is don't press escape, because that will cut you out of your VPN session, and then you have to call for the proctor to come set you up, and then you can just upset your rhythm a bit. So how do I feel about these exams in the immediate aftermath? So the first word I'd use to describe them would be exhaustive. They're a very good, comprehensive assessment of a range of different subject areas. Now, your exam will be slightly different to anyone else's. There are random questions that get picked out all the time, so you won't be able to buddy up with someone and say, oh, tell me all the answers. That's because there are hundreds and hundreds of questions in this database or repository of possible questions, particularly for the first 2 levels of desktop. And the second word I'd use in addition to exhaustive would be exhausting. You are very tight for time throughout. I would say that applied to me when I was about a year into my Tableau experience taking QA, and it applied to me nearly 3 years in taking professional. Very tight for time, you're always busy, always trying to do something, and if you're doing the multiple choice questions, you're always going back and checking back over, and if you're going so far as to take the certificate professional, then you'll know that any visualization, even that you do at work with plenty of time, is never complete. You're encouraged to do in 20 minutes, others for an hour and a half. You will have to make compromises along the way. And it's worth getting this out of the way. The exams are not easy. I deliberately picked out some dolly questions to kind of at least sort of drag you along to the second half of my presentation. If these exams are any good and should stand up, then they should be a solid test of your skill set. Tableau aren't trying to make things difficult for you to pass. There aren't any trick questions, and as I said earlier, everything's extremely well laid out, it's very clear and unambiguous. So if you're thinking about getting stuck into one of these, then how would you prepare? I mean, once you've actually purchased a certification, you've got 6 months in which to take it. So that's what I did with this certified professional. At the start of January, I purchased the exam, and I registered for it, and then I deferred it, and then I deferred it again. I wasn't quite ready, I deferred it again, until at the end of March, you saw from the cert earlier, I took the exam. 2 key things as far as I'm concerned: use the prep guides. So for each of the exams, on that certification webpage on Tableau.com, there is a clear, many-paged prep guide for each of the exams. There are other resources available online. Some of you may have used them. I've used them. I used one of them to help a colleague through her specialist exam recently. And whilst they are better than nothing, they are not generally well written. They are not fully representative of the sort of question you're going to get in the exam, whereas the ones in the prep guides that I've shown you already in examples of are much better. And the second would be to use the tool. Practice doing the things that will mimic the behaviour that you're going to get in those exam conditions. So I'll give you some examples of these now. For specialists in QA, they actually give you like a syllabus of skills that you are going to be measured on. I would say literally go through and tick every box in that syllabus to make sure you feel comfortable with the idea, because you know that one thing that you didn't brush up on is the one you're going to get asked in the exam, and you'll kick yourself if you're only a few points off getting through. And the sort of process I went through with some colleagues recently, we picked 3 or 4 of these elements and tried to combine them into a single task. So we said, right, we're going to focus on these 3 things, 3, 4 things. I would build up a view that would require them to use those 3, 4 elements, and then task them with recreating it. So they had something to work towards. They didn't really realise subconsciously that they were learning all of these different elements in the process. And of course, no Tableau talk, as Sam demonstrated earlier, should be complete without a reference to Makeover Monday. If you are not familiar with Makeover Monday, there's a reason why anyone who does a presentation about Tableau talks about it. It's because it's amazing. So this is an online project, a community project, in inverted commas. I have to use that every time I say community, which, as far as I'm concerned, has been a huge catalyst in my personal development, and they're both related to Tableau and outside of it, developing other skills that are outside of Tableau, just time boxing pieces of work, for instance. So if you're interested in finding out more about Makeover Monday, everything you need to know is on the website makeovermonday.co.uk. Knock yourselves out. Now, for the certification exams, taking part in Makeover Monday can be really effective at every level, as far as I'm concerned. For both specialist and associate, you get to practice using different data sources. They're structured differently, and unfamiliar topics. You're not going to get given questions relating to anything that you're currently working on. You're not going to get given questions on anything to do with Superstore data set. You will get data that you're unfamiliar with. So this is very good practice, and you can practice using different chart types. If you do 4 weeks of Makeover Monday, you do 4 different chart types, then you've tucked into a good chunk of this bottom left section here about creating basic charts. And as Sam showed, his first Makeover Monday was using I wouldn't use that word. So you haven't seen my first Makeover Monday. Anyway, so for the professional exam, you can also then use this experience to practice building views to type timescales. So there are certain things that you will need to do, as I said earlier, to very restricted time, and you'll have to make compromises on the way. So get in the habit of doing some Makeover Monday. You don't have to put it onto public if you're not happy with the result. But if you can get through recreating a visualization with a data set that you've not seen before in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, try different periods of time, get used to the idea of time boxing yourself and working towards a deadline. That process, for what it's worth, is really good just in getting used to just delivering work to a deadline. If your boss asks you to create something you need to take to a meeting in 45 minutes, that's doing your Makeover Monday in a time box fashion is a good representation of doing that sort of work. And So that repetition really is good, good practice. So why should you consider Tableau certification individually? So my primary argument for becoming certified in Tableau is around self-actualization. It's about putting the idea of imposter syndrome to bed, and having the title now of certified professional, I feel confident in describing myself and presenting myself as an expert. There is a full spectrum of people, from right beginners to Andy Kriebel, and most people are at this end. That's cool, but as you'll gradually work you through, the people who are in the top half are the ones using Tableau every day. Sam's using it 99.5% of the time. He's the Tableau expert. I'm using it half my day. I pitch myself as an expert in Tableau. It also means that when the time does come for me to take the next step in my career, or for you to take the next step in your career, you can point to your certification alongside your Tableau public profile as an illustration of your expertise. Now, when I was recruiting for my team, I knew the level of expertise that someone with a qualification came with. You wouldn't hire someone on the basis of qualification alone, of course, but it does give you a degree of comfort that the person you're bringing in isn't blagging it on the technical side. And if you've taken the certification yourself, you can make an informed judgment on their abilities. It's also a great tangible development objective. Now, most of you will, in your working lives, be given development objectives, PDPs, whatever you might want to call them, goals to achieve over the course of a period of time. And everyone who talks about goals, objectives, will extol the virtues of SMART objectives. This objective, becoming certified in Tableau, could not be smarter. It's very specific, it's very measurable, it's pass-fail. It's achievable. I've seen people go from 0 to specialist in less than 6 months, even having never even picked up Tableau before and only used public. They don't even have a desktop license. It's realistic. If you're motivated enough to come to a user group tonight, then it's realistic that you can also get certified. And they are time bound. Once you commit, as I said earlier, you've only got 6 months to take that exam. And for your business, not just you as an individual, but I've, as I said earlier, I've got first-hand recent experience of watching 12 people sign up for that specialist exam in December, and 12 of them have passed it within 6 months. And some of those, as I say, don't use Tableau every day, come along to sessions after work or at lunchtime sessions just to practice. They're interested in using the tool, and that is a realistic time frame, even if you are not using it on a regular basis. As Sam described earlier, he's neck deep in Excel spreadsheets. If you can find opportunities to practice using Tableau, you can find opportunities to learn to get certified. And as a business, you can use this to upskill your workforce, to retain your workforce even. There's that old adage around, what if we invest in our people and they leave? Alternatively, what if we don't invest in them and they stay? You definitely don't give me the credit for that. It's a very old adage. And you can also use it to identify the rising stars. Those of you in managerial roles, if you are to dangle the idea of certification to people in your team and your departments, this would be a great way of identifying those people who really are enthused about something that are self-starters. And if what you produce using Tableau is part of the service that you sell, then it can really distinguish yourselves from your competitors. If you can demonstrate that the people who will be working on a product or a project are all fit for the task, that could set your organisation apart and win business. So I'm going to draw to a close very briefly. Before I finish, so I talked about Laura. What happened to Chris? Chris, forgive me. I didn't talk about swag. One of the minor motivations for getting certified is you get a t-shirt if you get Desktop Professional, as demonstrated here. Chris is going to stand up and see what you get if you also get Server certified. You get a lovely maroon version, which I lost after, but I'm never going to get. In order to take the Server certified professional, it's a 7-hour exam?
It is.
Yeah.
Lunch in the exam.
You get lunch in the exam, right? You kind of, so you're treated like cattle, you just move from one location to another in the UK. Yeah. And as I promised at the start, these are links to all the resources I talked about, the various blogs that I can recommend. I didn't mention it, but I would also highly recommend a video, a 5-minute video, a tiny Tableau talk given by Joanna Hemingway around 2 years ago. talking about the associate level exam, the experience of being proctored, that sort of thing. And there's a great blog post by Simon, who's going to stand up now wearing his lovely light blue shirt. So Tableau wrote, sorry, I keep calling you Tableau, you are Tableau in my world. Simon wrote, as far as I was aware, the first and only blog post around getting certified at professional level. I've written the second, that's the final link there. And as promised, you can follow the link. That's the only thing you need to take away from this session. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you. Right, we're going to have a few questions. Questions?
So hi, so I'm currently on my placement year and will be returning back to my studies in September. And I've been using Tableau in my current role. I was just wondering, this sounds quite a good thing to kind of increase my graduate prospects. Kind of what you would, you know, any universities who are kind of encouraging this certification, or maybe how I can convince my university to help facilitate this?
I'm not aware of any, unless Steve's going to tell us about it now. Do you have an answer?
I'm not sure if the universities would actually encourage it, but I know if you're a student, you get a free license of Tableau. You just need to apply. There's an academic program that you can just send in proof of your academic status, and you get a free license for 12 months.
It's really easy.
Yeah.
You literally get it within hours.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And
I don't know if there's any discount for certification though. You might also be able to have a look on the website. Look under academic programs on Tableau.com.
Thanks, Steve.
Hi, that was a great talk, thank you. I just wanted to ask, for the resources that is on the Tableau website, how many hours do you think it would be for the professional exam to go through to kind of prepare yourself?
I think that's an open-ended question. It can depend upon you as an individual. It can depend upon what those gaps are. There is a syllabus also for professional, all the suggested things you need to brush up on, but things like best practices, you know, you will have a sense as to whether or not you are familiar with best practices. But on the exam guide, there is a link to a white paper or some documentation around their recommendations around visual best practices. It's a 4 or 5 page document. It's definitely worth a good read. It suggests very simple things that you can do to adopt visual best practices and that you can apply directly in the exam. But I think that's going to depend upon you and what that gap you might need to bridge would be. I gave the example to James Smith earlier, who's there, that I went through the syllabus for myself, identified a few things, among them things like top-end analysis, which I'd never practically done, and in the days leading up to it, I crammed on, made sure I knew it inside out, and it came up more than once in my exam. So, yeah, if it's the one thing you leave behind, it's the one thing you'll be tested on, I suspect.
So my question around, right, so I just my exam done on specialist last Sunday, and
Congratulations.
it's not what my relief was that, okay, I wasn't the first one who deferred the exam. Looks like you have done too. So I deferred twice, and then third time when I deferred, I ended up paying $5 extra. Then I was like, okay, no, that's it. So I wanted to get this done, so I've done it. So I think I faced some technical issues initially. It was 1 hour exam and 15 minutes actually, so go on in a way that, okay, I wanted to sort of those latency because of this virtual. Why not this being outsourced to Pearson Center or something, which I mean, I don't know whether the question could be you or Tableau, but nevertheless, this technical issue would be resolved, and then straight away we can get on to the exams.
Well, a few things I can say about that. So as far as I understand it, is entirely outsourced to another company who provide all the exam facilitation, and that, you know, if you are concerned about technical requirements, you can go on today. We could do it now and test whether or not this setup is suitable, whether or not you have appropriate latency on your internet connection to make sure that you're not going to have too many technical hitches when you get involved. And also, in those first 15 minutes when you're getting set up, they will make sure that the speed of your internet connection is sufficient before you do it. So, as I said earlier, it's not the first example I've heard of technical issues, but yeah, I would hope that if you're comfortable that your quality of your internet connection is good enough, that will put to bed almost 90% of all the technical issues that people, in my experience, have come across.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could pinpoint the moment in your career when you felt that you were ready to sit the exam, and what sort of made you make that decision to do it in the first place.
Looking back, I was prepared. At the time, I didn't feel prepared. So for which exam, I suppose, would be the question, because for the first one, so for taking the specialist, I actually took them back the other way around, because I did the QA first, because that was the only one that existed at the time. Specialist only came around after TC last year, Tableau conference, forgive me, and so that's only been around for 9 months. But as I say, I've worked with people who have literally not picked it up and been able to pass it within 6 months and not be doing it practically during their working day. So my bench test would be, or benchmark test would be, can you tick off all those items on the syllabus that you feel that you could explain it back to someone sat next to you? If you can, then I think you're ready.
One more question.
You said that you have to get certified for each version.
Forgive me, that used to be the case. It's no longer the case.
Okay, so 2019 it has various stages. So if you take the certification, does it assume that you have the latest version of Tableau available downloaded?
So glad you asked about this. So when you are going to prepare for the exam, if you go onto the website tableau.com/certification, it will tell you which version of Tableau Desktop is currently being used in the exams. So that's how you'll know whether or not you need to quickly bridge that gap in order to get ready for it in advance. If you're using 10.5 at work, and you know that we're using 2019.1 in the exams currently, which is the case when I checked it earlier, then you need to make sure that you've got an idea about all the additional functionality that you could be availing yourselves of, or that could be asked of you during that exam. So yeah, it's currently 2019.1. At some point it will jump. It's typically about one release behind, in order that you're not expecting everyone to be completely up to speed with it.
Mark?
Just one more thing, I don't think we've included it on there, but I'd say Google Tableau Quest, which is an initiative by Fee Gordon, which provides a framework to work with if you want to aim towards your certifications, and she's put in like the number of Make Your Mondays or Work at Wednesdays you need to do, and different other things you can do to help on your journey to certification. I highly recommend checking that out.
Tableau? What? Tableau.
Tableau Quest, so just Google that, it's on BizChick.
Yeah. And also she talked about this at Tableau conference, so if you go onto YouTube you can actually watch a 45-minute presentation all about Tableau Quest.
Yes,
It's brilliant, I can recommend it. I watched it again only last week.
yeah, so that was TC 2018.
Do you mind, just one more thing you didn't mention as well, is you are allowed to Google while you're in the exam as well. So if you did feel that you missed something out or you're not quite sure, it's quite useful because you can just quickly Google to double check. So just to mention that as well.
Yes, in the last exam you will not have the time, but yes you can. You're right. There are many other things I could be talking about. I could have done a 2-hour presentation on this. I won't bore you with it. But yeah, by all means reach out. You've got my Twitter handle at the start, the slide deck, or you can just find me at any point. I'll be very glad to talk more about it individually. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Last but not least, we have Bethany.
Hello!
Oh, Bethany.
We're going to have a nice, interesting, super fast demonstration of what's coming on. Super excited about what's coming in the next few minutes. Bethany, all yours.
Thank you. So, to your question about versions, don't worry because I'm going to tell you what's new in 2019.2 and what's coming in 2019.3 in this next presentation. So, we're going to go through 5 new features in 2019.2, and then I'm going to make some exciting announcements that you may be familiar with if you've read the keynote. If not, you get the even more polished, rehearsed version now. All right. So who has downloaded 2019.2? Raise your hand. Who's played with parameter actions? Keep your hand raised. All right, for those of you who have not, you are in for a treat. So parameter actions are a brand new feature which, much like set actions, which we released last year, enable all kinds of new types of interactive analytics. So parameter actions unify two existing features in Tableau. Actions, which enable mark selection in a visualization to trigger an event, with parameters, which let you capture end user input. And that input can be used in all kinds of places, like calculations, reference lines, titles, custom SQL. So essentially, we're giving you the power of software development, but as analysts. And that's why this feature is awesome. So let's go through what does this actually mean? A really basic example of a parameter action. So I have this line chart showing normalized house prices over time in London. And there's like two values to every data point. There's the year and then there's the price. And so when I click on this point, do you see what happened over here? It set this parameter, which is being used in the text here and the reference line, to pick up those two values. And so what's happening here is, if we look at the actions menu here, we have these new types of actions. So we recently added change set values in 18.3, and now we have change parameters. So when you go and look at this here, it's just saying, hit this year parameter, which is this thing here and this reference line here, with this field from the viz. So before, the only way to interact with a parameter is through a control dropdown that's static, and it's an ugly control, but now we're making that interaction direct with the visualization. It's also dynamic because as you get a new year, you can now set the parameter with the latest year value. So who's ever wanted dynamic parameters? Now you have them. Yes!
Yes!
All right. So that deserves a bigger applause. Okay, so at the moment this looks pretty boring though. It's like I'm clicking on a data point and it's moving a line and it's updating some text. What's really powerful about this is that because parameters can be used in calculations, your mark selection is now able to drive calculations, which can do all kinds of powerful things like compute year-over-year growth. Who here has to do like any kind of reporting of like, you know, how are things changing over time? Raise your hand if you've had to do that, right? Calcs and all that. Okay, so good news. That can now all be driven through a visualization. So now that parameter has set this year value, I can use that parameter in a calc to say parameter -1. And now I have access to the previous year. So this 2008 is being driven by a calculation, and if I go click on something else, it's able to calculate the previous year and update that value. Then, because I have the previous year, well, now I want to access the previous year's value in the calculation language, because I need to know that value versus that value to be able to calculate the change. Well, but now I have 2008 in the calc language, which was from 2009, which was from the parameter. And so now I can go and calculate that value, this 509. It's now also accessible in my calc language, and I can see, you know, it's driving this reference line down here. Okay, so now I have these two values for my current year and my previous year. Those are both in the calc language, and so now I can calculate the difference. How much did they change? So then I've got this like third or fourth calc that's just doing that one minus that one divided by that one. Now I've got 10%. Well, now I have that number. I don't just want it as a number. I actually want to go and figure out how are all kinds of different things in my data changing over time. And so I can then take this measure and then break that down further by other things like the residential classification. And so now I can start to see, oh, like people, like areas in inner city cosmopolitan grew by 11% in this year, while student neighborhoods declined by 7%. And so now as I'm clicking on this viz, through this chain of calculations that are being driven by that interaction, it's now able to break down anything in your data set and show you the year-over-year growth just at the click of a button. Who's excited about this? example of the kinds of things you can do. So within the context of a single visualization, we make it really easy to make comparisons among the bars. I can see that this one's the highest. But sometimes you want to just know, like, what's the highest number on my dashboard? Or how does this value in this chart compare to this value in this chart? Like, I actually want to make comparisons across charts. So here we're looking at the average price. It's broken down by these residential classifications. It's also broken down by tube zone here, like obviously zone 1 is like, if you live there, well done. And then also by local authority. So my question may be just like, where's the most expensive place to live? And I don't really care how you're breaking it down, just find the most expensive place. So if I go click on highly qualified professionals, it's now picked up this number, this 732,000 pounds. It's assigned that to a parameter, and then that parameter can be used to drive the reference lines and the color. And so now I can instantly see, oh, well, neighborhoods where highly qualified professionals live are actually only about half the value of places in zone 1. So I can make a comparison between these charts. And then I can also see that these local authorities here, like Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea and all the way down to Richmond, are on average, and Camden, I think that is, Brent? No, Camden. Yeah, these places are also more expensive than where highly qualified professionals live. So now it's like, this is like a whole new world of interactive analytics, because I'm now not just making comparisons within the charts, but across charts. So those are just two simple examples of the kinds of things that you can do. These are more like analytic use cases. There's also like tons of things you can do from a UX design perspective, and I would encourage everyone to go follow Ken, I'm gonna say his name wrong, Flaherty? Yes. He's published this awesome workbook with like 15 examples of just like great UX design things you can do with parameter actions. So, feature 1. Who likes this?
Yes.
All right, feature number 2. Now, I'm going to give you guys a full disclosure, because we actually need your help, like really, really hard with this one. Spatial calculations. There is in Seattle right now, like 3 developers who are like super excited about this, hiding in a corner, and nobody understands what they've built. and we just kind of like didn't market this. But we've actually entered this entirely new space of software with 2019.2, and we just kind of forgot to tell you about it. So I'm going to try and explain what we built, and then if you guys are excited, please go tweet about it. It's related to maps, so I think you'll like this one, Sam. Okay, so a common problem you may have is that you have 2 data sources, and the only thing that they share, the only way to relate them is through location. So I have these 2 data sources. One is on house sales. So every dot here is a house that was sold. If you bought a house in London since 1995, I have your house purchase in this data set. And then on the other side here, I have the housing supply. So this tells me, in this neighborhood of Newham, where I used to live, there's a very high density of, like, there's a lot of houses. There's like 1,200 houses just in that neighborhood. So common problem in business is like, what's your inventory turnover? I've like applied this to real estate here. So my question is like, where is like the market turning over its inventory of housing the fastest? How many of those 1,200 houses sold last year? So how would you go about answering this question? There's nothing to match houses to these regions on. You need to know which point like for each transaction, which area does it fall inside? That's a spatial relationship. So in 2019.2, we very, very quietly released this calculation called make point. And what this lets you do is take columns of latitudes and longitudes in your data source and convert it into a spatial object. Once it's a spatial object, it then understands like geometry and geometric relationships. So you can then map the point to the area that it belongs to. So spatial relationship would do something like take Buckingham Palace and map it to Westminster, or Tableau and map it to Southwark. And so that's exactly what's happening here. It's using this intersect relationship, and now that it understands this is geometry, I can intersect it inside of a region. So now that we have that capability, we can spatially relate and spatially aggregate data. So if I go back and look at these two maps just layered on each other, these points, houses layered on top of the regions, I don't want to just see this, I want to count the number of points in every region, spatial aggregation. So now, because of make points, I can do that. I can just simply count the number of house sales, and now the color is a reflection of the number of points that fall inside that region. And then you instantly see here, this area here in Southwark, where we happen to be right now, sold like a third of its housing stock last year, possibly because of the large brand new apartment blocks that they've just put up. So that is spatial relationships and spatial aggregation, which previously required complex. It's really funny. Kent's the PM of mapping, by the way. He built this feature. So spatial relationship and spatial aggregation inside of Tableau, which previously required complex GIS tools and specialist skills and consultants, and we are making that accessible to you now. Yes. Help Kent's engineers like feel the reward that they deserve. All right, so now we're going to talk about another new mapping feature, vector maps. And so one of the things that spatial aggregation means is you can now find where you should be looking on your map. Sometimes that can be quite hard. So now that we have this, we've related the house sales to the housing stock, we can calculate where's the housing turnover highest. So just dividing those two things by each other, I can now see in Greenwich, this is kind of crazy, but on average since 1995, 20 houses every year are sold in that region. So if I want to know where is that, I can just go and click on this, and I can see it. There's where that is. What about this one? What about this one? And you're going to start to see something kind of amazing as I start looking at all of these places here that have like high turnover. What are you noticing? Let's zoom in. So using Tableau's new vector maps in 19.2, we're seamlessly rendering these background maps as you zoom in, adding all these new levels of detail, train stations, roads, rivers, and so on. And what you see here is that all of these like high turnover neighborhoods are around the river, which is kind of cool, right? Does anyone of you Londoners have a hypothesis as to why that might be?
It's newer development, right?
Any other guesses?
The Thames is poisonous.
I like your answer. You are totally right, yes. So now, using another new feature in 19.2, show hide containers, let me launch this explanation here. Percent of houses that are new builds. So, on average, going back to 1995, 9% of the houses sold each year are new builds in London. However, when you compare that to these regions here, nearly 60% of these neighborhoods are selling new builds. So if you were to live in one of these places here, there's a high likelihood that you'd be purchasing a new property. By the way, there's like 5 set actions on the screen right now. Just want to put that out there. All right, so just to recap, in the last few minutes, you have seen parameter actions. There's so many, I can't remember, spatial calculations, new vector maps, and show hide containers. And so those are 4 new features in 19.2. But what's really powerful about these is not the individual features, but how they combine to solve end-to-end scenarios, and they let you just create entirely new things. When we're building features at Tableau, the thing we think about is like, are we building something that helps you build whatever you want? Like we want to make you guys product managers where you can go build tools and products for other people to help make decisions. So I'm going to show you now all 4 of these things, how they combine to help you build a decision-making tool. And the subject of this is, of course, house purchases. So have you or any of your users or customers or clients ever had to make a decision that requires making trade-offs between multiple different criteria and considering your preferences and your domain expertise in context of the data? Common problem? Yes. So deciding where to purchase a house is one of these problems where you need to make trade-offs between things like, how far are you from the station? Is the neighborhood affordable? Does it have a lot of restaurants if you don't like cooking like me? And is it generally young and vibrant? And so quickly iterating through, I'm able to see kind of a general geographic overview of how those values are distributed. But now when it comes down to it, I need to actually pick a neighborhood that weighs the trade-offs between these four things. So as I hover over one of these areas, watch what happens in this left-hand criteria panel. It's now lighting up where that sits on all four, and I can easily now start to make a comparison of trade-offs. And let's say I wanted to settle on this set of criteria. Now I want to go and find what properties are available in that region. And so when I click on this, it's now popping up and persisting my preferences in this criteria panel right here. And so now I want to go see, show me the details, what's the underlying data? And so you can now see this in this Excel-like table that everybody wants, with column headers, right? Maybe I want a detached house, because I could totally afford a £12 million place. Maybe I decide, actually, I don't want any of these. This isn't good. I want to save my preferences, but I don't like these specific properties. So how can we make Tableau smart? Do I have to go and manually now search through this all over again to find a similar neighborhood? Or can Tableau just be smart enough and recommend to me which neighborhoods to go look next based on that information stored over there? Aha, Tableau can be smart. So I'm going to click on this similarity icon. I'm going to click on this similarity icon here. And what that's going to do is, is now pop up with the next neighborhoods to go look. And those of you who are from London, like, this is real. This is like, believe it, that's Hampstead Heath and this is Kensington. Like, those are definitely related. I'm dreaming here, but And you can see here, now there's this visual validation. It's like a visual calculator of the algorithm presenting here exactly where each one of those neighborhoods sits in these trade-offs. And you can see, you can start to convince end users to believe in the power of statistics because they can see what it's doing. And then I can go back and say, okay, now show me the new details. And now I can apply my domain knowledge to, I need to be able to get to Southwark every day, and so I want to be on the Jubilee line, and so I want to look at places where the nearest train station is Swiss Cottage, which you can do a Tableau prep today. We're also adding distance calculations because Tableau is becoming a spatial computation engine. Go tweet about it. And so now I've applied my domain knowledge to arriving at a decision. And this is now preferences, domain knowledge, and data science all combined with new 2019.2 features to build a decision-making tool in Tableau. Does anyone want to have a go? I think the show hide container is pretty obvious where that is. The vector maps are pretty obvious. Does anyone want to have a go at identifying where the parameter actions are? Any volunteers? Just shout out. There's 5. This, changing the color of the icons. 1. That doesn't count as 4. It is 4, but counting it as 1.
The neighborhood you click on.
Oh wait, hold on. The neighborhood you click on? Yep. What does that do?
That tells the parameter which neighborhood to use, and then creates calculations from the calculator field driven by that parameter to talk to the other neighbors, all the other neighborhoods around here to look at the distances.
Yeah, so this one does a few things. The first thing it does is it pops up this bubble. It's an interaction that's not a filter. It's actually just changing the viz based on the interaction. So that's one. And then you're right. The other one is calculating the similar neighborhoods. That's a third one. This one here. So that's driven by, actually, hold on. I'll just tell you. So another, yeah, so clicking on this thing does a few things. One is it pops up a thing here. Two is, let me just reset that. That's another one. Watch this space here. When I click on this, it like subtly comes up with, hey, there's a new option. Now the state of your viz has changed. And so now I'm going to give you a new option, which is go highlight similar things. So that's one. And then clicking on this is one, which goes and it highlights the things that are similar. And this also uses new spatial calculations, bakeline, to draw the relationship. So, and then reset is another one here. So, go and rewrite your job title. You are now analytics product managers. You can build products in Tableau. That is what we want you to do. Yes. Excellent. All right, so that's part one. What's new in 2019.2? Now we're going to jump into what is coming in 2019.3. So you may be aware, about a year ago, we acquired this company from MIT, from Bayes Probabilistic Computing Lab. And we are now launching our first feature that integrates their technology inside of Tableau. It's called Explain Data. It generates interactive explanations of your data. And I'm going to show you what this means. So we're looking at London housing data. And in this quiz here, we're looking at the average duration of home ownership by borough. I used to live here, where everyone apparently tries to escape. They do not stay there for long. I recently escaped. And so you may, if you did not know, want to know, why are people not living, or they're not owning their houses for very long in this area? Why? What's causing this high turnover? Well now, with Explain Data, you don't need to wonder, and you also don't need to drag and drop every dimension in your data source to try and figure it out. Because now, you can just go and hover over this new icon here, and that is going to launch Explain Data, which will iterate through every single column in your data source, running machine learning models, selecting and ranking which dimensions most explain this variation. So on this left-hand panel here, what you're seeing now is a number of different explanations that it's surfaced. So it's found 4 possible dimensions that explain this variation. And then in this right-hand side, it's given you a combination of visual and natural language explanations to say what's special about that particular dimension. So the first one is this residential group. And what it's saying here is the gray bars are showing you the distribution across London in general. So across London, a small percent of neighborhoods are formed of young ethnic communities. But in this area, more than 60% of the neighborhoods are classified as young ethnic communities. And then, when we scroll down here, you can see that the duration of homeownership is lower for young ethnic communities, and so therefore that is a possible explanation for this variance. Let's look at this next one here, this housing affordability group. So this is actually from census data. It's barriers to housing and services. In London, that means affordability. Elsewhere, it means distance from the post office and so on. So here, what this is saying is there's a larger proportion of neighborhoods that are extremely low affordability in this particular borough than in the rest of London. And then if we look at this one here on percent of population that is retired, this is saying that a much higher percent of neighborhoods have less than 10% of their population is over the age of retirement, over the age of 65. Now, what's great about this is Tableau. I don't know, does anybody recognize this visualization? Does it look familiar? Could this have possibly been built in Tableau? Could this be an interactive visualization? Why, yes, it is. This is a starting point for your analysis. Explain Data is like a data scientist guiding you through, helping you identify where you should be looking next in your data. So now I can see there's this interesting thing about retired people. It's like clearly related to age, so maybe what I really want to look at is just age. I can drag that in here, and that's going to now update and show me very clearly that yes, this neighborhood is much younger in general, and young people move more frequently, they're more mobile, and that's why probably why they stay for less time in Newham. Explain data. Woo. But there's more. So this is what explain data looks like from the context of an analysis of analyzing a particular worksheet. But what about a dashboard? So in this view here, we're looking at where is the most house sales using our new spatial joins in 2019.2. Where are the most number of house sales by neighborhood? And then you can see here in this area of Newham, there's a very high density of house sales by the river, where all the new builds are. So let's click on this. Let's click on this area here. And now I can see what's happening over time. Large number of house sales, huge spikes in price. Why? What happened in Q4 of 2017 here? Let's go see what explain data finds. It finds here, check this out, new buildings. New buildings. A much higher proportion of the sales in this quarter were for new builds. We found that earlier through your domain knowledge of cycling around London, but now you don't need to do that because anyone with access to the data set can automatically generate that interactive explanation. Woo. And then, if we're looking at price as well, there's this huge spike in price where in this particular quarter, the average house price was almost £7 million. And so what happened in that quarter? Let's go and explain this data point here. And in this case, explain data finds different types of explanations. And in this case, it's found a single extreme value. There was a transaction here that was worth almost £100 million. And so if we wanted to go and see what does this viz look like, if we remove that data point, we can now do that. Here, it's excluded the extreme value. Let me put it back in. This is the original, and this is excluding the extreme value. So you can just easily remove that on the fly. I once was working with a customer who, for some reason, the money was wrong. We were just like, what's happening? And through like 8 people searching through the data, we eventually found that there was a transaction in Vietnamese dong, which has an exchange rate of like 30,000 to 1. It's like, explain data will just now find that for you. And another point here is you can see, like, by excluding that outlier, it's raised this new peak. So now I want to explain the data point on the viz that was auto-generated from explain data. You can do that. You can recursively explain the explanations. And so let's go and run explain data on this high point here. Any guesses? That's an amazing guess. So in this case, fewer of the properties bought in that quarter were flats, and way more were of this type other. And so other probably captures things like commercial properties, which is why they are so high. And so that tells me, well, what I should probably do is not just try and exclude individual data points one at a time, but just maybe go and exclude type other. And now, having done that, we end up with a time series that looks pretty normal within a normal range. So all of that is now automatic, it's interactive, and it's accessible to everyone with explain data. And you can access this right now. Like, don't sleep tonight. website, come to Tableau.com, get beta, and then sign up to the Tableau early feedback. It's in alpha at the moment. When you sign up to that, it will become available on the pre-release site. So we definitely want to hear what you think of it. Thank you very much. All right.
All right.
Time for questions or?
Do we have time for questions? Yes, we do. Questions?
What is the name
Ask
of the
me a question.
presenter? We don't know your name.
Right. Hi, I'm Bethany. Nice to meet you.
Hello, Bethany. Just on.
Bethany Lyons.
Bethany Lyons.
Yes.
I
that
did
is
say
my
your name, right?
It's Lyons@tableau.com. Send me an email. Send me all your feature requests.
You're going to do my question now.
Yes.
So I'm just interested to know what was going on in your nearest neighbour calculation when you selected a neighbourhood and it pulled up the closest ones on 3 or 4 metrics.
Yeah. So it's using. So it uses clusters. So this feature here, this cluster feature here. So it's clustering the 4 measures, and then using the clusters. Well, then the parameter action says, give me the cluster that the selected neighborhood belongs to, and then return all of the other neighborhoods that are in that same cluster. Yes.
Oh, wow. Hi, yeah, this is very impressive, but do you do this for, every cities or cities for a minimum amount of inhabitants, or only Kensington and Croydon and Camden and all that? No, if I was doing this on top of the map of Manchester, could you do that as well?
Yeah.
So there's no minimum cities if I do it from his village, that guy with the yellow t-shirt, his tiny place near Bath. Will you be able to see, you'll be able to see, this regroupment of houses? Could you do that from anywhere on earth?
Yeah, so the principle is generic. It applied, so you also don't even need to apply, you could apply this technique outside of mapping. This idea of just cluster some things based on multiple common fields. You could apply that to any scenario. And I really want to see the first person publish a viz to Twitter that does this in a non-mapping use case. I think in the mapping scenario, the question would be are things in London similar enough to Manchester that they can actually be compared?
Okay, sorry, I'm not sure if I was clear then. If we look at Hampstead that you had earlier, yeah, who defined the fact that this postcode or this longitude and latitude belongs in Hampstead and not in Camden or something like that? Is that part of the mapping?
So who defined that a particular property belongs in Hampstead? Yes, that is what MakePoint does. The thing that we kind of undersold.
Okay.
But Kent is talking about. Sacrilege.
Okay, and MakePoint will know that for tons of cities and all that.
So you need to have, let me go back to how MakePoint is working. Okay, so in here, I'm relating it to a spatial file. This geometry here that is being intersected with is a spatial file of lower super output areas, which are, so in the UK, there's loads of spatial files that are just open access for all kinds of different
That answers my
granularities.
questions. You have to map this and this. All right, okay.
Yeah, you map the point to the polygon.
Thank you.
Yes.
So we had on the lines joining the related neighborhoods. Does that always join right into the geographical center, or is there anything is that something you can change?
You could, I think I cheated and I just did it based on the average location of all the houses in the area. But if you had a spatial file that has the centroid of your area, then you could do it to that centroid.
Okay, so you actually define where that joins to.
Yeah, well, in my case, I cheated and I used the data itself. Because there's so many points in here, I just took the average latitude and longitude of all of the houses that fall in the area. Because that was easy. Yeah.
About explain data, amazing. I was wondering, can you customize what's happening. So, for example, if you go back to the clustering thing, can you say, okay, you've created automatically, let's say 7 cluster, I need 5.
Mhm.
Can you do that? Can you customize the analysis behind
Behind explain data.
Yeah.
Explain data is magic. So no.
No.
Thanks.
On that note, we saw what explain data would tell us about outliers.
Yeah.
Does it do anything to tell us about the rest of our data? That is not necessarily an outlier.
So it won't tell you, so no, it's really about telling you what's special about this particular data point versus just in general, these things are correlated. It doesn't really do that.
Last question.
Thank you. Just on explain data, is there any kind of information about the techniques that it uses to pull out those special points of interest?
I think our product manager on that has put together a slide deck with the pipeline of 7 things that happen. I don't have it and I don't know it, but I could get it for you if you wanted.
Thank you.
Are you going to make any of these notebooks available?
Yeah, I'll put them on public.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank
Thanks
you
very
very
much.
Thank you so much, Bethany. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Next Tableau user group, some point in July. We don't know the date exactly yet, so we are trying to coordinate and everything. The summer party, we're going to throw the whole house out the window and all stuff. So stay tuned for the announcements, and we'll let you know once we know the date. Thank you so much for coming.
Let's see you again.
Cheers, Patrick. See you around.
Next month, next time.
Yeah, see you. Good to see you.
Yeah, because for you that's kind of.
We're probably going to take a bus, I'm not sure.
Yes, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Good. You come from Berlin, okay?
Yeah, see, you're a man of sensibility.
Do you know, I thought I'm trekking into London. I'm gonna. Actually, I thought the one person that would be in shorts would be you. So oh, have you? Yeah, yeah. You recovered from.
I thought we could get away with putting shorts.